I want to welcome Congressman Vern Buchanan, a Republican from Florida and chairman of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Health. Congressman, thank you for joining us. You're a very important person, so I got to finish the intro. He's the author of the Mandating Exclusive Review of Individual Treatments, or MERIT Act, which requires the CMS to evaluate treatments and cures individually and based on their own merits rather than a broad class of drugs. Thank you for joining us. You're a busy guy. Why are you here today? What's your personal connection to this?
Well, when I hear the stories, I get a little emotional myself. So my father had Alzheimer's. Never sick a day in his life. Got to be 58, and we found out. I remember taking him to the neurosurgeon that he had Alzheimer's. I didn't even know what it was. I heard of it, but and then as a family, we're a blue-collar family. I was in business at the time, so doing pretty good. We ended up getting him in an assisted living facility, and then after about a couple of visits, I couldn't leave him there. It was just too deplorable for me. I could afford to do it. But like I said, one of 6 kids, and then we moved him into our home, thinking that, that would be the best thing, and I think it was. But something that we originally thought estimated 3 or 4 years ended up being 10 years, where we took care of him with a private nurse. And it was a family. My wife's a saint, frankly, because I'm trying to build a business, and she's dealing with that every day. But it was an unbelievable challenge. Now, it's kind of crazy because here I sit. I've been working on some of this indirectly and directly for 20 years on Alzheimer's. It's one of my passions. And now I'm in a chairman of health, which I'm with the secretary of HHS last night for dinner, and this was at the top of the list. And so I'm very passionate about making a difference on this front. I want to get people basically access to these drugs. I think it's, it was a year and a half ago roughly, where it was 20%. If you catch it early, it might have an impact. Then it became 30%, and now they're saying up 35, up to 60%. So I think it's a huge deal, but it's like anything else. It's kind of a preventative thing you're going to have to do. So that's something we'll get dealt with and talk about. But I just want to make sure there's access to funding, and of course the VA stepped up and they're doing that already. But I'm very excited, personally myself, because I haven't seen this much so-called progress. Now, some of it may be hyped or something, I don't know, but I think it's clearly moving in the right direction. And I'm very excited about the possibilities of all these new drugs, but especially this latest one with Eli Lilly in terms of what they're doing there. When I hear something like 60%, I'm a possibility thinker, so I like that number.
Right. You want to be cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. So, but I think, but also I just look at it in, I wrote the numbers down. There's about 6.7 million in the country have Alzheimer's. That's the numbers they claim. I think personally it could be double that. I mean, how do they know what that number is?
Right.
I'm in an area, I'm in Florida, Sarasota, the Tampa area, and they claim it's about 12% of the population, the senior population. But we're number 2 in terms of the country, which is a lot of our parents are down there and everything else. But they're saying 6.7 million in the country have Alzheimer's. And I personally, just my own number, I think it's a lot higher than that. Because how do you know? It's kind of like unless you've gone in. And so there's going to be a lot of people, just thinking out loud, a lot of the seniors in my area and everything else are going, well, I forgot the keys last week. I'm going to go get it checked. Right. So you're going to need PET scans. And so it's kind of interesting to see where that's going to go, because why wouldn't you?
Right.
If there's a 60% chance that you can make a difference if you get it early. And but anyway, our goal, we've got the MERIT Act, and basically we're going to do everything we can to kind of get them to look at these drugs as standalone drugs and get them funded for people that need access.
And where's the vehicle? Where do you see that? Is that going to be attached to something, that legislation? I'm
hoping so. I think it's going to be a bipartisan. I'm viewed as a very bipartisan member. So I'll get the support, I think, on both sides. I've talked to Democrats, and I think they're very open-minded. I don't know how anybody couldn't be supportive. I mean, there's a lot of challenges in terms of diseases, but this has got to be at the top of the list. I think it's number 6 in terms of, people dying from it, and I just think there's a lot more that can be done in this area. So I'm very excited, very optimistic, and I'm hoping that we can continue to make progress, but I'll take the 60% today and then work on the 80% tomorrow.
Sure, sure. You mentioned the HHS Secretary Becerra, who we had an event last week on. As you know, there's a lot of debate on CMS and FDA and how they handle these treatments. What did you learn from the Secretary?
Very open-minded. I served with him on the committee.
Yep.
We had dinner last night, and we just talked about, really, we're going to get together in the near future and dig into this a lot more. I've asked him to look into it. He's already aware of it. And I don't know if he knows all the facts and all the things that we're talking about this morning, but he will. And I feel like if there's anybody I can work with, it'll be him.
You mentioned that you had the financial wherewithal to deal with Alzheimer's, and back then, you didn't even know what it was. I mean, can you talk about how the stigma, it's still there, but at least more people know about Alzheimer's. And as you say, I totally agree with you that I think a lot of people in the audience, I've known people who we don't know if they had Alzheimer's. They might have had. So the numbers are probably higher. But can you talk a little bit about that?
I think for me, I was the oldest of 6, took my dad, worked with him initially. I was in denial, like everybody else. My dad was never sick, born in Kentucky, never sick a day in his life. And all of a sudden, big strong. Probably, but my mom wasn't. I mean, she knew that something changed. And part of it
Moms are very smart.
Yeah.
They really
She said that he was never the same after that. Now, what happened, add a little bit more to it. He worked in the factory. He was about ready to retire. He's up a level on a platform, took a step back, unfortunately, or a step or two, fell about a story down on a cement floor, hitting his head. So they think there was a term back then called PICS, but I think they kind of rolled it up or rolled that, we did or the doctor did in terms of him calling it Alzheimer's. So, but I would say for a couple, 3 years, we were just completely in denial, not even think it's a possibility, can't be dad, and never sick, that type of thing. When I say never sick, in terms of never spent a night in the hospital or anything like that.
Right.
So but we dealt with it the best we could. But I'll tell you, the emotion you go through by putting them initially in a facility and then having to change that out and dealing with the reality of all that, and all the kids, everybody has a different opinion about dad, where he needs to stay and all that.
Very stressful.
So we were very fortunate. We had built a business and had the funds, and so we had a separate room. We built it out, a nice apartment. But you're talking about full-time nursing and everything else. And my wife took on a lot of the challenge of that too. So God bless her.
Can you imagine, and obviously countless families have had to do it, where they didn't have the financial wherewithal, and how difficult that would be on top of everything that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I cannot imagine that. Because I know it's 24-hour care. You can't let them in the middle of the night. They're walking out the door. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? I just the harsh reality is that most people, if there's a couple of kids, they might put them somewhere locally, but you got to have 24-hour care. And so we were just fortunate we could. But like I said, we thought maybe it'd be 3 or 4 years. Ended up being 10 years. So.
As you know, you've been on the committee, has jurisdiction over healthcare, trade, and taxes, and healthcare.
I do a lot more taxes and trades over the years, but
healthcare is very polarizing. But in this space, as you mentioned, and we were talking to the Congresswoman before, she had legislation that's bipartisan. Mm-hmm. Kind of, where do you see in this polarizing time? We've got to come up with treatments. We've got to get the government approved. What do you hear from constituents that you bring back to Washington that government agencies need to do? And to be fair, there has been bipartisan legislation, 21st Century Cures Act, the FDA right to try, but treatments are coming, but we've got to be ready for them process-wise. Where are we on that?
What I hear back home, people want to cut out a lot of the nonsense and want us to get things done. And this is an area they want to get done. When you're in an area, I have the 5th oldest senior population in my district, Sarasota to Tampa in that area, but just Florida in general is at 12% of seniors have Alzheimer's. So that's something we've got to dig in together and get done. I've already talked to some Democrats, and there's no question in my mind, especially now with the progress we've made in the last year and a half, that we're going to get something done substantially. substantial on this. So that's just my feeling about it. I feel good about it.
Going forward, and on the panel, we were discussing workforce issues and the future of Medicare. As you know, it doesn't have a bright future financially. That's a major problem. Could be a significant problem with an aging population. What's the answer to those big issues? And does it have to be a bipartisan solution?
There's no way you're going to fix the big issue we've got. It's a little longer discussion, but my first issue, my first week I came to Congress, I introduced a bill. Every new Congress, I want a balanced budget amendment. Ideally, we're in a $130 billion deficit, and now you look at today, where we went from back then at $8 trillion, now we're at 31 trillion, going to 35 trillion. So without dealing with entitlements on a bipartisan basis, I don't know where this goes, but it's not going to end good if we don't have the courage to step up and do that. And I have a senior committee, senior community. I'm willing to be out front on it in terms with others, but we've got to do it together. One side or the other is not going to do it, but they've got to get the political courage to work together and get it done. There are some that would like to do it, but this is all about politics, and we got these harsh realities that we've got to deal with. You know, Social Security is $1.1 trillion. You've got Medicare's $700 billion. You got now interest on the debt, and this is the scary part. $667 billion this year, quickly going to $1 trillion. Just the interest on the debt. So these things have to be dealt with. I think during the 80s they did deal with them in terms of making some tweaks and adjustments. And there could be some adjustments that'll make a big difference. And I think people, as they get to understand it, but someone's got to lead on it.
Right.
And if it's all about politics in 24, it's probably not going to get done. But again, you're going to go from 31 trillion, 32 trillion to 35 trillion. You're going to dig that hole that much bigger. I thought we should be dealing with it right now.
And as you mentioned, we're in the 2024 cycle. It's not going to happen. No major legislation on Medicare or entitlements is going to happen before the election. But it's going to have to be done soon after that because, and you can talk a little bit about that, the more we wait, the bigger the problem becomes.
Yeah, there's no question. And I mean, part of the problem is I didn't think they could raise the interest rates like they have. What's really taken it up, not only the 32 trillion or whatever, but the fact that we've gone from money being free to, you know, having to pay 6-7%. So all of a sudden it's real money. So I don't know where that'll be driven a lot by inflation, but even if that comes down a little, I don't understand this city and a lot of people up here, how as a business person, how you continue to spend money you don't have. Where else, 49 out of 50 governors have to balance their budget. All of us in this room have somewhat of a budget, or ideally in a budget. You can overspend for a period of time, but not forever. And we're at that point where, you know, this has got to get dealt with, you know, I say yesterday. And that's what I've been pushing on our side. But again, unless the other side, and I'll say a senior member on the Democratic side, who I've got a very good rapport with, he said to me, he said, look, we got to get in the boat together, blame each other, and just go get it done. And there's some truth to that. But my point is, we've got to deal with it.
Last question, going back to your personal connection, what is your advice at the local level? You mentioned your constituents, aging population. If you're, whether a caregiver or you're struggling yourself with a diagnosis, what can they do?
It's a tough question. I just think you've got to try to, work with whatever family you have, work within the community, Alzheimer's Association. There's a lot of different groups like that, but they're kind of, in my mind, the leader on a lot of these things, is to work with them. There's care groups. There's people that meet together collectively, have some of the same challenges about how to best deal with it. It's a big challenge, and it's only going to get bigger. But I think work with the resources you've got in your community.
Very important issue. We are out of time. Please thank the Congressman for joining us today.
Bob, good to see you. Yeah, good to see you.
Great stuff.
Thank you, Congressman Buchanan and Bob Cusack, and a big thank you to all of our guests this morning. That brings us to the end of our program. On behalf of the Hill and our sponsors, Otska, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in person and those online. If you missed any portion of today's discussion, the full event video will be available on thehill.com shortly. There'll also be clips on our social media accounts, so please feel free to share. Thank you for joining us today.